So we get a lot of people wanting to protect their clothing brand. It's a really, really common thing that comes up. We'll get a phone call of someone wanting to launch a cool brand name for their shirts, hoodies, beanies, you name it. So this will be, I think, a really, really valuable piece of content for a lot of you. So the first step is trying to, first of all, identify what class of goods clothing would be under, and also get a sense of what types of descriptions that people actually provide when they are seeking protection for clothing. So let's hop in, and first things first, my general recommendation is to start out with a trademark ID manual. So what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to go into the trademark ID manual and just do a generic search for something like clothing or apparel. Apparel would work too, but what you're quickly going to figure out is you're going to figure out that clothing falls under class 25. If you want more generic, you can try including both clothing and apparel. Or actually, I think just apparel is probably a better bet. And you're going to see a bunch of examples. But what you're going to learn quickly is that class 25 is the way to go. You can try various searches. Um, I will tell you what I generally like to see is something generic like clothing and apparel, usually followed by namely, and then listing out all the various types of clothing and apparel. But if you have any questions or any doubts, you can type in specific types of clothing, and you'll see that you'll identify the class. Jeans, you'll also see 25. Basically, any sort of clothing that you can imagine, you're going to find in under class 25. What's also interesting is that footwear also falls under class 25. So that's a really useful thing to remember and to keep in mind. So again, once we have the class ID number, the next step in trying to protect your clothing brand is trying to identify other marks that might be deemed to be similarly confusing to the mark that you are interested in pursuing. So one of the requirements for obtaining trademark registration is that there don't already exist similarly confusing marks already on the principal register. So the way to do that is to do a search. Now, what I'm going to do now is now that we have the information, we understand what the trademark ID, what the class number is for clothing and apparel. We're now going to go and try to search for under that class in the trademark database for similarly sounding or similar type of brand names that also sell clothing. And again, you want to hit test2.uspto.gov. But what you're going to want to do is I would recommend for clothing to start out with just doing a structured search. So I would go in and I would actually use the middle option. Just to be clear, you could do the basic word search and just type your brand name in the box, but I will show you why it's probably a little better to actually do a structured search if you know for sure that you're seeking a clothing and apparel. So clothing and apparel is under class 25. Now, this is a really, really important tip that a lot of people make mistakes when they're first doing searches. They forget to add the 0. So searching on the trademark database through the uspto.gov is a really useful tool if you know how to use it and if you know how to use it correctly. If you do not have this 0 before, then you're not actually going to identify class 25 goods and services. So what you're going to do is you're going to pick 25 and then international class. And then for the other field, the second field, you're going to pick probably the basic index. So this is going to be a combination of various aspects of a basic word mark search. So it'll also cover design elements that also feature that word that you put into here. Now, the question, of course, that this begs is, what is the brand that we want to search? Let's go with Flip Threads. Super random, I know, but it's just for purposes of example. Now, another really, really important thing, you want to make sure this operator is actually set to and. Why is that? Well, think about it. If you did or, this would return all results that both match Flip Threads or match class 25. So this is essentially going to return the universe of marks covering clothing and apparel under class 25. So that would not be very helpful if you were doing a search. You want to make sure you have the and selected. Now, this is actually going to translate into straight and. So it's going to look for, if you have a space, it's actually going to look for all search results that have both flip and the word threads in the basic index. So you can see, interestingly, you can actually pick plural or not plural. So we can actually do flip thread and then search for plurals, and that would actually give you similar results. So now let's do a search. Now, what's interesting here, this is going to, a lot of these are actually going to have that same word. So one of the two words. What I would recommend, if FlipThread was actually the brand, what we're going to see when we do the search is not any results. So I would, in this situation, you might consider filing under just that word. But to be more thorough, I do think it's a really, really good idea to search in this format. No, so let's go back to this format. So initially, we have some confidence. Now, I personally, I unload a couple things. One is that we actually have 1,522 records. Not all of these are going to be live, so that's something to keep in mind. Another really, really important thing that I want to bring to your attention is this word threads here. This is a really good example where you have to remember that when you're doing these searches, you want to look for phonetic equivalents as well. So it's really, really important. The nice thing about the basic index is that it actually, you notice it actually matched threads spelled with a D and a Z. So that's kind of interesting. And you see down here, they actually disclaim threads. So an important strategy, make sure that when you guys are doing your searches that you don't limit yourself to just that spelling, that you actually spell other more common, or, well, maybe not as common, but maybe more unusual spellings of the word, okay? Now, if we want to find the live marks, you're gonna want to include this language here. This L or D, this is live or dead indicator, and then live. And this is gonna narrow our search down by a lot, because this, as you can see, this only 121 live with this particular variation of threads. Let's look at flip thread with this variation. Again, this is a lot more manageable. So if we go down, what I recommend doing at this stage is usually just doing word searches just on your browser to see if you actually find anything with flip thread and with that variation. And you can see in this case, the first 100 set didn't yield any. And then again, you can do the same thing here, try to identify, see if there's any flip threads. Second seems clean. And then let's try the third. See, flip thread, only 2 locations. The last one, again, only 2 locations. And so basically, at this point, we have a lot of confidence that flip thread is probably could be a viable trademark that we can protect. So again, using the basic index, very, very good way to go. Adding the live indicator to ensure that you're only looking at live marks. This is a really good technique. If you want to be super conservative, you can look through the dead marks. There is a possibility that that a brand might revive itself, and even technically an expired trademark. So keep that in mind. But generally, this is relatively safe, and I can say I'd be pretty confident in this situation of pursuing this mark, just given the fact that we've gone through. Now, again, if we're doing a more thorough search, really look out for phonetic spellings. It's really important that you evaluate and consider alternative spellings of very common words. You don't want to get stuck in the situation where some examiner finds the identical phonetic spelling, but they use different letters in an already existing mark, because now you're going to be running into some trouble. You might receive a likelihood of confusion refusal. And I can tell you now, those are fairly difficult to overcome. So keep that in mind as you're doing this. So that's basically the rundown on how you go about trying to identify marks in order to protect your clothing brand. So you basically want to do a search. I would do a search under class 25. Now remember, it's really important, add that 0. There isn't an international class 25. It's 3 digits. And